Boldwood presents The Defiant Seamstress, written by Evelyn Hood and read by Abby Andrews. Chapter 1. Sunlight glittered on the trimming of the big drum that led the procession, and on the pikes carried by the militia marching behind the drummer. Its brilliance made a brave show of the red coats worn by the bailies and burgesses marching in the main body of the procession. It seemed, that June day of 1784, to be anxious to make up for the long, bitter winter that had killed off a considerable number of Paisley's old folk, and a fair sprinkling of newborn infants as well. "There he is! There goes Uncle Robert!" Christian Knox released her cousin Rab's arm and waved vigorously at Robert Montgomery, marching with the other new bailies. "He's awful red in the face, is he not?" Rab asked anxiously as his father strode by, looking neither to right nor to left. "So would you be, if they'd just taken you by the arms and legs and duped your rump on the duping stain," said Christian on a splutter of mirth. Her cousin looked at her with reproach. "It's a great honour to be appointed a bailie, and to take part in the Lawnmowers' Day parade." "Maybe," said Christian, unrepentant, "but it seems to me to be a daft, unmanly thing to do to mark the dignified occasion, bouncing a man's backside off a stone. It's tradition. That doesn't make it any less daft." Then, as the last of the procession passed by and the crowd about them began to break up and flock to the town centre for the speechifying, she flapped her hands before her face in a vain attempt to ward off the day's heat, and added, low-voiced, "You've not forgotten about tonight, have you?" "No, but—" Rab hesitated, gnawing on his lower lip. "Och, Rab, you're not going to let me down." "I'm not happy about it at all. You'd be best to forget the whole business." "Why should the laddies be the one to get all the fun? All my life I've wanted to swim in the Hammels, and you promised to go with me." "Aye, but why can't Daniel be the one to take you?" demanded Rab. "He's your brother, not me." "If I asked Daniel to take me, he'd only take fright at the thought and go running to mother and father with his tongue wagging. Please, Rab," she coaxed, as only Christian could, adding when he hesitated, "If you don't want to accompany me, I'll go swimming by myself." "You can't do that. It'll be dark, and if anything happens, there'll be nobody to help you." Christian whisked about and joined the throng easing their way along the footpath, making towards the town centre, where her mother and father and young brother would be waiting for her. "Nothing'll happen," she threw over her shoulder. "So I'm going, whether or not I have to go alone." For a moment, she thought that Rab had decided to stick to his own decision and refuse her. For a moment, she thought that her hoped-for swim in the pleasantly cool waters of the river court was lost. Foolish and impetuous though she may be at times, she had more sense than to go to the Hammels alone at night. Then, to her great relief, she heard the patter of feet behind her, and he caught up with her. "I suppose someone has to make sure your daft ideas don't lead you into trouble, Christian Knox." She beamed at him and slipped her hand into his. "An hour before midnight, then, down at the Hammels." He caught at one final straw. "You've got nothing to wear." "I filched a pair of Daniel's breeches and one of his shirts. An hour before midnight, then." "Aye," said her cousin with resignation. "An hour before midnight." Christian heaved a great sigh of pleasure and, rounding the corner of High Street, plunged into the seething, holiday-minded mass of folk, towing Rab behind her in search of their families. It was the custom in Paisley for the folk to go to bed early and rise early. After dark, the only people in the streets were revellers, beggars, with no place to call home, and the town watch, made up of local men who took it in turns to patrol the streets during the dark hours. So, everything was quiet when Christian crept down the staircase of her father's fine home on Oakshaw Hill. She made for the rear of the house, tiptoed through the kitchen, and let herself quietly out of the back door, leaving it on the latch so that she could slip back in when she came home. All during the hot, bright day, she had been looking forward to her first swim in the Hammels. Although the sun had long gone, the night was warm and airless, and her skin tingled at the thought of contact with cool water. There was a pleasant freedom, too, in the clothes she was wearing. Her slim legs, unhampered for once by skirts and petticoats, were clad in a pair of her brother's breeches and hose, and she had donned his linen shirt and bundled her dark hair beneath one of his caps for good measure, just in case she met anyone on the way. Down the brae she went, out into the high street, at the almshouse corner, then turned left, swinging confidently along the street and covering the ground fast. In no time at all, she had reached the old bridge in the town centre, left the road, and was clambering down the riverbank to where the water foamed over the Hamels, a small natural weir on the river court. The river itself ran through the heart of the town, by the open marketplace. It was in the deep pool immediately below the Hamels that the town's boys swam in the summer. Down here, away from the street, pockets of warm, dark shadow were cast by the banking, although the Hamels themselves glowed with a silvery light, patched here and there, with black as the water foamed over the rocky lip. The pool below the weir was a smooth, dark, cool, inviting mirror beneath the starry sky. There were no lights in the houses huddled along the opposite bank, or in the back windows of the houses and shops skirting the bridge. Christian surveyed the scene and drew in a deep breath of satisfaction. For years, ever since she was a small child, she had longed to join the boys scrambling over the rocks and diving joyously into the water amid great bursts of spray. But it wasn't done for girls to swim with the lads, and until now, she had yearned in vain. A hand reached out from the sleeping town behind her and took hold of her shoulder. She spun round with a gasp of fright that was hastily swallowed and disguised as a fit of coughing as she saw that it was only Rab. "Whisht, will you?" he said in panic, thumping her on the back. "Do you want the town watch about our ears?" "What did you have to fright me like that for?" she hissed back, indignantly. Then, "What's that you're carrying?" He released the bundle beneath his arm and let it drop to the ground between their feet. "A cloth to dry ourselves with." "Oh!" She hadn't thought about bringing a cloth with her. Rab surveyed her pityingly and shook his head. "It's big enough for both of us, unless," he added, hopefully, "you've changed your mind." "Would I be here if I had?" She pulled Daniel's cap off and let her hair spill free, then kicked off her shoes and turned towards the water. "Come on then!" With a shrug of resignation, Rab unfastened his shirt and let it drop to the ground. In the moonlight, the upper part of his body had a golden glimmer to it. He was broad-chested and slim-waisted, lithe and easy in his movements. Free now of childish plumpness and hovering, at 15 years of age, on the verge of manhood. "Can you swim?" "Of course I can!" Christian's voice was scathing. "My father used to take us to a wee loch up the braes. I learned to swim there." She didn't tell him that it had only been the once and that her father had kept a firm grip of her all the time, refusing to let her go beyond the shallows. Instead, she made for the water, grimacing with pain as the stones underfoot stabbed into her instep. Once again, her cousin's hand grabbed her. "No so near the weir! Here, where it's shallow!" She followed him, then gave a suppressed squeal as her foot splashed into the water. "It's cold!" "Of course it's cold! It's running water! And it's come all the way down from the braes! Come on!" Rab kept a firm grip on her wrist, drawing her into the pool. She ploughed after him, setting her teeth against further squeaks and squeals as the deepening water clasped her ankles, calves, knees, and thighs in its icy grip. "Now!" said Rab, when they were waist-deep and the water was eddying round them. He released her hand, then suddenly ducked forward. With a back kick that splashed water over her face and breast, he was gone. She stared wildly about the dark stretch of the pool. It seemed to take a long time before his head broke surface a few yards away. "What are you waiting for?" he asked, and turned away from her to swim towards the opposite bank. Christian lunged into the water, the breath going from her at its chill. All during the hot day, she had thought longingly of the pool's cooling kiss, but she hadn't realised that it would be so cold. Unable to swim well, numbed and confused, she almost panicked when the stony riverbed seemed to drop away from beneath her feet. Then she saw a rocky outcrop nearby and managed to flounder clumsily over to clutch at it. Her bare feet sought and found the stony bed, and she stood up, pushing long wet hair from her face, then scrambled from the water to perch on the rock. Rab came back across the pool with enviably easy, graceful strokes and halted a few yards away, treading water. "Are you all right?" "Of course." Christian's jaw had taken on a life of its own. It was vibrating with cold, and it was hard to speak clearly. "Are you sure?" She found that if she took in a long, deep breath, her voice sounded better. And when she relaxed her tense muscles, the chill eased and a tingle of well-being and exultation began to spread through her. She had done it. She was swimming in the Hamels. She drew her feet up on the rock, hugging her knees. "I'm quite sure." Then, as he said nothing, but stayed where he was, staring at her, she asked tartly, "Have I grown two heads?" "No, Rab said, and continued to gape. Christian was quite unaware of the picture she presented in the moonlight. Her small face, with its sleek cap of wet hair, revealed the promise of a rich, mature beauty to come. Daniel's soaked shirt and breeches moulded the sweet, youthful curves of her body. Her slim ankles and bare feet were snowy white against the dark rock, each perfect toenail gleaming like a tiny pearl in the moonlight. I said Rab, and Christian, suddenly and unaccountably embarrassed by his attention, got to her feet, balancing on the slippery, uneven rock. "Out of the way! I'm going to dive in!" "No!" She had often seen the lads diving off the rocks and envied them, the feeling of swooping through the air like a bird. She knew that the pool was deep enough to be safe. "It's easy," she said, and swung her arms up, just as she had seen the lads do. Rab, realising only just in time that there was no stopping her, threw himself to one side to avoid a collision. Somehow, in spite of her belief that she was going to arc through the air, dividing the surface of the pool neatly, like a leaping fish, Christian's entire body hit the water with a resounding crash that knocked the breath from her. There was an explosive noise in her ears, as though the entire town had fallen apart, and she was dimly aware of its great burst of spray. All at once, the water had become as hard as the ground. Diving into it felt like the time she had fallen out of the apple tree at home onto the hard, bruising earth. She opened her mouth in an automatic squawk of protest and choked on black water. She wasn't at all certain whether she was going down towards the riverbed or up towards the surface. She was in a world of water, with no floor or ceiling, no north or south. Rab's hands clutched at her and pulled strongly. She felt Daniel's shirt rip, and even in her panic had time to realise that her mother was going to be furious about it. Then her head broke the surface, and she spluttered and choked, drew in a long, bubbly breath, and choked again, as she was bundled to the bank and deposited in shallow water, where she sat and gasped like a stranded fish. When she lifted her head, pushing her soaking hair from her face, Rab was standing over her like an avenging angel. His eyes dark pools of horror at the thought of what might have been. "You daft fool, ye! Telling me you could swim when you couldn't!" "I can," she said feebly. Then, gaining energy now that the crisis was over, "If you'd left me alone instead of gripping at me like that..." "If I'd left you alone, you'd have drowned. Do you realise that, Christian Knox?" He stooped and took her by the shoulders, shaking her. She heard the shirt tear again, in the region of her shoulder blades. "Let go of me! That's the last time I..." In their anger with each other, they had completely forgotten the need for caution. By the time they heard feet scrambling towards them down the banking, it was too late to hide. A lamp that had been hidden behind a sturdy body was suddenly brought into view, illuminating the pair that struggled and squabbled in the shallows. "What's afoot here, then?" A man's voice wanted to know. Rab released his cousin and stepped back, his hands falling to his sides. Christian scrambled up to stand by him, her hair streaming water over her shoulders and back. "By God!" the man behind the lamp said in astonishment. "It's a lassie!" Then he raised his voice. "Come and see the bonny pair of fish I've caught in the river tonight!" Rab's gaze smouldered accusingly at Christian in the lamplight as the second watchman slithered down the banking to add the glow from his own lamp to the scene. "What is it, Fraser?" He stepped into the golden pool of light. A tall man, with a head of thick dark hair gleaming silver at the temples, and a strong square face, marked by a smallpox scar on the right side, from the corner of his mouth to the lobe of his ear. His hazel eyes took in the scene with one sweep, then blinked and widened, staring. Christian and Rab looked back at him in horror. They hadn't realised that this man, of all men, was on the town watch tonight. There was a long, tense silence. Then, "Well, Christian?" Gavin Knox asked his daughter coolly. "What do you mean by this, madam?" Chapter 2. "Well?" Gavin asked as his wife came into the kitchen. Margaret Knox closed the door behind her and laid the empty cup on the table. "She drank it all down, and she was almost asleep when I left her." She looked at the wet clothes her husband had been trying to arrange before the range. "Look at Daniel's shirt, ripped almost clean from waist to collar. I'll have to sew." "You'll do nothing of the sort. It was Christian who damaged it, and Christian will repair it." "If she doesn't catch the pneumonia first and die." "Not her. Not Christian," said Gavin with calm assurance, leaving the soaking shirt and breeches and putting one arm around his wife. "The good Lord meant her for a long and colourful life. I'm certain of that. Come on. It's time we were getting to our own bed." In the privacy of their bedchamber, Margaret said wistfully, "I wish Christian was as biddable and as easy to raise as Daniel. If you ask me, he should have been the lassie and her the laddie, the way their natures lie. What's going to become of her, Gavin? One of those days her wildness is going to be the death of her." He blew the candle out and slid into bed beside her, settling his big body into the mattress with a sigh of contentment. "Don't fret yourself. She's your daughter, Margaret, and always was. Now you know what heartaches you must have given your own mother in your younger days." "I was never like that. For one thing, I would never have thought up a daft notion like swimming in the Hamels. She could have drowned, but she didn't drown. So there's no sense in fretting yourself over what might have been. Rab's a sensible laddie. He looked after her." "Sensible? Letting her coax him into mischief isn't my idea of being sensible. He's too soft with Christian altogether. She can wrap him round her little finger. I'll have something to say to Robert and Annie about that son of theirs tomorrow." "You'll do nothing of the sort. He's a young man now, a full weaver with his own loom. I'll not have you carrying tales to your brother about Rab. Pay heed to me now, Margaret." She subsided, recognising the tone in his voice and knowing that there was no sense in arguing with it. Then, after a while, she lifted herself on one elbow. "Gavin," she said, "I can't help worrying about the lassie." "I've noticed," said her husband dryly. "She belongs neither to one world nor the other. She's got no need to go out and earn her living, as I had to do. And yet, she's altogether too intelligent and too willful to settle down as some man's wife. What's to become of her?" "No doubt Christian will decide that for herself. Now that she's coaxed me into paying for extra lessons when she's finished with her schooling next month, she might end up as a teacher herself." "I can't see Christian as a teacher. If she'd had the inclination, she could have been helping me in the Poor's Hospital schoolroom," mused Margaret, who managed to do other things, as well as run her surgeon husband's home and see to their children. Gavin gave an almighty yawn and turned over. "Go to sleep, Margaret. Christian will make her own way in the world, never fret." "You'll talk to her in the morning, before you go out of the house?" "I'll do that." "And be firm with her," said his wife. "She's gone too far this time. You mind what I'm saying, Gavin Knox?" "I hear you." Gavin's voice mumbled from the darkness. "And I'll be firm. I promise you. I promise you anything. If you just go to sleep and let me do likewise." Rab arrived at the house the next morning before the surgeon and his family had finished breaking their fast. The maidservant led him into the empty parlour, where he paced the floor nervously, jumping when the door opened. "No need to look like a flea, for it's only myself." his cousin Daniel said cheerfully. I've just come to get my school books. How's Christian this morning? Daniel grinned. Her hair's standing on end after it's soaking, and her nose is red. She's going to have a right chill. Then his blue eyes sobered. Man, what possessed you to go along with her mad scheme? It was my idea, not hers. Daniel gathered up the books lying on the table by the window and fastened a leather strap round them deftly. I doubt if it was, but it's brave of you to take... He broke off as the rest of the family came into the room. Is it not time you're away to the school, Daniel? His father asked curtly. I'm just going. Well, Rab? Gavin said when the door had closed behind his son. Daniel was right. Christian's eyes were shadowed with want of sleep, and her hair, which hadn't been properly brushed after its soaking, had dried to a frizzy mop round her pale face. Her nose was pink-rimmed. Rab's heart went out to her. He wrenched his gaze away from her and faced his uncle. I came to tell you that last night was all my doing. Gavin, dressed and ready to set off to Glasgow, where he was due to attend the patients in one of the city's infirmaries, gave him a steely glance. He was in no mood to be forgiving, for when he had finally slept the night before, he had dreamed about his daughter's body washing to and fro beneath the Hamels, her pale dead face turned up to the moon. The picture was still with him, and as a result, he had come to the confrontation in a tense frame of mind. Indeed. And have you no brains at all in that thick-skulled head of yours? Do you not realise what could have happened to my daughter if your foolish idea had got out of hand? Christian went to stand by her cousin. It wasn't Rab's fault at all, so don't listen to him. But it was mine, and I don't know, she said, glaring at Rab over her shoulder. Why he's here at all? It was me who asked him to go to the Hamels last night. It was me, she went on, quickly and loudly, as Rab opened his mouth to protest. Who dived off the rocks? Diving? Margaret, horrified, caught at her husband's sleeve. What's this about diving from the rocks? I knew what I was about. Only Rab didn't know that, and he caught hold of me, and that's when Daniel's shirt tore, and... I don't know what got into your head, lassie, her father thundered. Diving from the rocks, indeed, and you scarce able to swim. I can swim well enough. That you can't, milady. 13 years of age, and you don't have the sense you were born with. Rab, you're 2 years older than Christian. You should have had more idea of the dangers. Margaret chimed in, and the boy's face went dusky red. Maybe it's as well he was there, Gavin said. If Christian had gone alone, she might have been killed. I tell you, I knew what I was about. Not, her father said icily, when I saw you. You were like a drowned rat, and don't deny it. She opened her mouth to do just that, and spoiled her argument by sneezing instead. There! Margaret pounced. You've caught a chill. I haven't! Christian protested and sneezed again. It seems that you've decided on your own punishment, lass, Gavin said, a hint of amused sympathy warming his eyes. You'll stay indoors today. And mend your brother's shirt, Margaret added. If Christian had let matters lie there, the business might have been over and forgotten. She knew full well that she had been in the wrong and deserved her punishment, but the horror of missing a day from school went straight to her tongue. I'll mend the shirt, but I'll not keep to the house, father. Groaning inwardly, Rab tugged at her sleeve, but she rushed on, unthinking in her panic. I've only another few weeks at the school, and I must go today. Gavin, on his way to the door to fetch his hat, stopped and swung round, the half-smile leaving his face. You'll do as I say. I'll not! Then, seeing the storm clouds gathering on his brow again, she added hurriedly, Please, father, anything but staying away from the school when I've only got a little while left there as it is. Father and daughter faced each other. Two pairs of hazel eyes clashed and held. Then Gavin gave the merest hint of a shrug. Very well. Go to school, if you must, he said. But you have to accept another punishment. I will. Then I'll withdraw my agreement to pay for those extra lessons you've been pestering me for. Her mouth dropped open with shock. But... You said you'd accept another punishment, and you'll not get a third chance. The matter's ended, Christian. There's no more to be said. Colour flooded into her face, then receded as quickly. With a muffled sob, she caught up her skirts and fled from the room, pushing past her father. Uncle Gavin, I said the matter's ended, Rab. As far as your part in last night's madness goes, I've no doubt your father's dealt with you. So, we'll leave it at that. Margaret, I'll be home in good time for my supper. He walked out, leaving Rab dumb with misery. He knew, as they all knew, how desperately Christian wanted to continue with her education. Her younger brother Daniel was a scholar at the grammar school on School Wynd. But to her chagrin, his sister, who attended a ladies' school, was coming to the end of her formal education. She had been overjoyed when her father had agreed to pay for special tuition for her in Latin and arithmetic and geography. Margaret, as appalled as her daughter, and Rab at the severity of the punishment, caught up with her husband in the hall and said, low-voiced, Gavin, you surely don't mean it. He settled his tricorn hat firmly into place on his dark head. I've said it, Margaret, and I'll not go back on it now. You're being too hard on her. Confound it, woman. You were the one who hectored me about being firm. I know, but... Gavin kissed her on the cheek and opened the front door. I've said it, and there's no going back. Christian must learn the meaning of discipline. The matter's settled, and then it must rest. She's only got herself to blame, he said, and left the house. Margaret Knox had been born in a weaver's cottage, and was the daughter and sister of weavers. All her life, Christian had loved the sound of the looms, and whenever she could, she spent hours watching the weavers at work. Scarcely a day passed when she didn't visit the cottage in Townhead, where Rab worked with his father. As he had expected, as he had hoped, she came to the weaving shop later that day for sympathy and consolation. Rab's drawboy, a child employed to work the overhead harness of the trawloom, was sitting on the footpath in the afternoon sun, his bare toes, used to standing for long hours on a cold earthen floor, wriggling ecstatically in the heat. His small grubby fingers were busily plaiting and twisting yarn into a simple, the cords the drawboys pulled on to set the harness in action. Stepping down from the door to the earth floor of the shop, blinking in the sudden dimness after the bright sunlight, Christian found Rab alone. There were only 2 looms in the small shop. One, a hand loom, worked by Robert Montgomery. The other, a draw loom, worked by his son. Rab had recently finished his apprenticeship with red-headed Jamie Todd, a close friend of the Montgomery family, and he was proud of his skill with the draw loom, a fairly new invention in Paisley. Unlike the hand loom, the draw loom could weave curved, intricate patterns. When Christian came in with storm clouds still darkening her brow, he was busily rubbing 2 long hand brushes together to work a solution of flour paste well into them. The smell of the paste hung in the air. I thought you might look in. It's not fair! Christian burst out, close to tears. I'm vexed for you, Christian. But does it really matter if you never have the way of Latin and figuring? Rab asked sensibly. You know enough now to see you through life. It's not life I'm thinking of. It's the learning itself. Christian sneezed and dug irritably in her pocket for a handkerchief, which she swatted at her nose. Rab passed her on the way to his loom, where he swept the brushes, one in either hand, over the warp threads stretched between the back beam of the loom and the intricate wooden harness above. I never studied these extra things, and I don't feel the lack. You already knew what you wanted to do with your life. Daniel's getting the chance to study all manner of things, and he's no more clever than me. Aye, well, Daniel's probably going to take up some sort of trade that needs a lot of knowledge. Rab tossed the words over his shoulder, then put the brushes down and peered closely at the warp, testing a strand between finger and thumb. The paste strengthened the yarn. With a nod of satisfaction, he picked up a big square goose quill fan and began to waft it close to the warp to dry the paste. Christian returned to the real bone of contention. My father promised me those lessons, and he's gone back on his word. Only because you wouldn't accept the first punishment he came up with. Christian was silent, nibbling at her lower lip. She would have given everything she possessed to be able to turn the clock back, to bow her head meekly and stay away from school for the day as her father had commanded. But knowing that she had been in the wrong didn't help matters now. "You should have taken his tongue lashing and kept your own tongue between your teeth," Rab went on remorselessly. "The way I did when the town watch hauled me home last night and woke my own father." "I've got more smedum in me than that," Christian returned, with a flash of spirit. Rab put the fan aside and tested the warp again, shrugging the criticism off with one movement of his broadening shoulders. "At least he got the scolding over with, and no more loss on either side," he said. "Anyway, you should have kenned that your own father was with the town watch last night." "How was I to know he was taking on someone else's turn as a favour?" They glared at each other. Then Rab said uncomfortably, "You'd best go. My father will be back at any minute, for he's only taken some muslin to the tambourers. I'll get into more bother if he thinks I've been chattering to you instead of getting on with my work." Christian, working on suppressing another sneeze, nodded absently. Robert Montgomery was one of the local weavers who had taken up the weaving of fine muslins as well as linen. He himself was a handloom weaver, and after the muslin was woven, the designs had to be tambored, sewn on by hand. "Rab, I must have those lessons, even if I have to steal the silver to pay for them. Don't be daft." "How else can I get it?" She threw her hands out. "I can't work for it. I don't know how." Looking at her, arms outspread, her back to the sunlit window, the light from behind her piercing the loose bodice of her gown and picking out the shadowy outline of her slender body, Rab was suddenly disconcertingly reminded of the vision she had made the night before. Then, her breasts and waist had been outlined by the wet shirt, her skin like alabaster in the moonlight, her face almost that of a stranger, a woman. His pulse leapt, then throbbed, and he swallowed to clear a thickened throat, averting his eyes, going to the window that looked out onto the street and thumping on the glass to let the drawboy know that he was wanted. "You'd best go," he said again, almost pleadingly. "Away home and stitch Daniel's torn shirt. It's already done." Christian dropped her arms to her sides and walked to the other windowsill to run a finger over the bars of the birdcage that sat there. Its inhabitants were two young sparrows that Rab's drawboy had taken from the nest and raised by hand. Perky and cheerful, falling over each other to investigate the finger that had been poked between the bars of their temporary home, they were almost old enough and strong enough to be taken to the braes and set free. The boy came scurrying in and took up his position by the loom. Grasping the sempos in his two hands, Rab slid onto the say-tray, the long weaving bench. "And it's as good as new," Christian said over her shoulder. "He'll scarce be able to tell which shirt I took. Stitching's the only useful thing I've learned in that dame school. But it's not going to." Then she stopped, as Rab's earlier words burst into her mind like a shower of sparks from a fire. She left the fledglings to their own devices and swung back to confront her cousin, her face glowing. "That's it, Rab! That's the answer! I'll earn the money to pay for my own lessons." "How?" he asked wearily. The drawboy, impatient to be at work now that he had been called in from the sunshine, let go of the cord and plunged his fingers into his thick, dirty fair hair, nails clawing at his scalp, keeping one wary eye on Rab. "Tambouring, of course!" Christian caroled cheerfully. "Tambouring for the weavers!" Chapter 3. Robert Montgomery stretched booted feet across his sister's hearthrug, took an appreciative swig from the glass in his hand, and completed his tale. "So I thought I'd best come and see what the two of you said before I agreed to take the lass on." Margaret eyed her husband apprehensively and was glad to see that Gavin, resting one shoulder comfortably against the mantel shelf, was grinning. "I've no objection. In fact," he added, "I'm pleased to know that she's going to fill up her time with some useful work instead of getting into more mischief. Does she know you're here?" "I told her I'd feel happier if I spoke to you first." "And what did she say to that?" Robert hesitated, then laughed and admitted, "She said it was welcome to do as I wished, and she was going to take on tambouring anyway, for someone else, if not for me. And to tell you the truth, I'd as soon it was for me, for I'm badly in need of some good seamstresses. You'll find Christian's one of the best. She's a fine hand with a needle. Margaret allowed herself that brief moment to boast about her daughter, then got down to more serious business. Now, tell me how Annie's getting on, for it's been a week or two since I last spoke to her. Robert accepted another glass of claret and settled himself deeper into his chair. He seldom came to his sister's fine house, and it gave Margaret pleasure to see him sitting in her parlour. Pleasure and a little pain, because with every day that passed, Robert grew more like their father, Duncan Montgomery, who had died just over a year before. Meg, Duncan's wife, had decided to spend her remaining years in Ayrshire, on the farm where she had been raised, looking after her two brothers, both widowers now. Robert and Annie had moved their brood into the house in Townhead, on the western side of the town, that Duncan and Meg had built when their own children were small. Annie's fine, as busy as ever, for all that the two lads are grown now. Then he said proudly, Duncan started his apprenticeship with Jimmy Todd. You'll be hoping he'll do as well on the Loomis Rab. Robert shook his head. I doubt that. Annie says that in every two, there's a rebel. That's our Duncan. And your Christian, maybe. And look at our own brother Thomas, taking up medicine instead of following in father's trade as I did. No, Rab's the natural weaver of the two. But that doesn't mean that Duncan can't do well for himself once he puts his mind to it, and stops stravaguing off with his friends whenever he gets the chance. When Robert finally took his leave, Margaret closed the door behind him and went back into the parlour. It's sad, the way families break up. There's my mother down in Ayrshire, and Thomas a physician in Dunfermline, and for all that Robert's close by, I see so little of him. It happens with families. There was a curt note in Gavin's voice. His parents had long since died, and the short visit his wanderlust brother had paid to Paisley several years before had ended in trouble and bitterness. Did you know about this latest escapade of Christian's? He went on, anxious to divert his wife's mind from the past. She mentioned it to me as a way of earning the money for her lessons, but I thought that you thought I'd put my foot down. He raised an eyebrow at her. To tell the truth, I did. Gavin shook his head. I said I'd not pay for them. But I didn't forbid her to find the silver herself. I'm proud of the lassie, Margaret. She's got determination. Although, he added thoughtfully, I'm not certain she'll keep at it. I think she will. We'll see, said Gavin. We'll see. Normally, Christian hurried eagerly to school, but on the morning of her final day, she walked slowly, beneath a cloud of despair. It would be some time before she earned enough to pay for additional tuition. In the meantime, she must study as best she could, using her own carefully preserved school books and borrowing books from Daniel. Sometimes, in her darker moments, she had begun to wonder if her nimble fingers would ever earn the sum she needed. But she kept her doubts to herself. To voice them would be to recognise them openly and to admit defeat before she had even entered the battle. As she turned into Snedden Street, her feet seemed to tap out a dirge. The last time. The last time. This was the last time she would walk to the building that housed Miss Glenn's School for Young Ladies. The last time she would turn in at that particular door. The last time she would climb these particular stairs. The last time she would take her seat at the shabby wooden table. The other pupils, excited at the prospect of their summer holidays, and, for some, the end of their school days, were in a festive mood throughout the day. Christian ignored them, working hard, trying to prolong the last precious moments of her education for as long as she could. When Miss Glenn finally rapped on her desk and dismissed the class, the others fled, scurrying down the stairs and out into the sunshine in a giggling, chattering bunch. Christian slowly picked up her books, a lump gathering in her throat. Come along, lassie, I've got plenty to do if you haven't, Miss Glenn urged, adding as she waited at the door. And what do you intend to do with yourself, now that your school days are over? I'm tampering for my uncle. Indeed, you'll do well enough at it, for you were always one of my best needlework pupils. But I'd have thought you'd have gone in for teaching. You've got the ability. Maybe one day. First, I must earn some money. I've more learning to do. The woman gave an exasperated click of the tongue. Lassie, you're not still on about that, are you? I've told you before, reading and writing and needlework are all that a young woman needs. You've done well, and there's no sense in wanting the moon. There was no sense in arguing with her either. Christian had tried it often enough without success. So she kept her rebellious eyes on the floor and said, Yes, Miss Glenn. Well, I suppose tambourning's as good an occupation as any, for the time being. It'll keep you out of mischief until the right man comes along and gives you a house to look after. The lump disappeared in a great gulp of outraged frustration. Christian bounced out of the door and down the stairs, completely forgetting to record the last time her foot touched each familiar tread, and shot out into the sunshine like a cork freed from a bottle. I'll show her, she vowed behind compressed lips as she marched homeward, her precious books tucked beneath her elbow. I'll show them all. I don't care how long it takes. The vow and the anger that had prompted it made her feel a little better. The summer unfolded like a rich, colourful carpet. It was a beautiful summer, a summer for walking and playing bowls and swimming. The Paisley weavers, working from home and free to plan their own hours as long as the work was done, started their looms early in the mornings and had finished the day's work by noon, enabling them to make the most of the warm afternoons. To Rab's annoyance, Christian was far too busy with her tambouring to climb the braes around Paisley with him, or to wander along the river banks. True, she made a pretty sight sitting in the garden behind her father's house, her down, bent, dark head framed by the mass of honeysuckle at her back. But he soon grew tired of lying on the grass watching her. You're going to ruin your eyes and turn into an old woman before your time, he said gloomily. Christian's gaze lifted to his for a moment, then returned to the muslin cloth stretched tightly between the wooden rings in her hands. Her needle continued on its flashing way through a floral pattern. Ugh, Christian, come for a walk. Later, maybe. I must get this finished. After a while, Rab got up and wandered to the gate that led round the side of the house to the road. He looked back once, but her head was still bent over her work. Sulkily, he left. Throughout the summer, Christian stitched busily. Muslin after muslin flowed through her hands. Reams of coloured thread blossomed into pattern upon pattern. But although her uncle seemed pleased with her work and was always ready to give her more, the supply of coins she was storing carefully in a wooden box in her room still seemed pitifully small. Counting it over one day, she realised that if she wanted to earn enough, she must do more than sew. After a day or two spent in thought, she laid her sewing aside and went purposefully out of the house and down the hill to visit Robert Montgomery. He eyed her warily as she marched into the weaving shed. There was something about the set of her shoulders, the glow in her eyes, that he had come to recognise as a sign that his niece had thought of another idea. She didn't keep him in suspense for long. Uncle Robert, would it not be a good idea if your tambourers were to work together? Under the one roof, you mean? Lassie, if you're thinking of gathering a crowd of chattering women in this weaving shop, let me tell you, he began with mounting alarm, but a small upraised hand stopped him mid-sentence. Indeed I am not. That's a daft idea, if ever I heard one, she said sweepingly. What I mean is, would it not be better to have one person responsible for taking the work round the women and bringing it back to you, instead of you having to spend time on it, or them coming here and taking up time that you need for your loom? It seems to me that if I was to see to it for you and guaranteed to get the work back to you when you needed it, I could save you a lot of bother. The beat of Rab's loom slowed and stopped. His head appeared round the edge of the wooden frame. Christian, what mad notion have you got in your head now? He wanted to know. Nothing that concerns you, Robert snapped across the shop at him. But father, get on with your work and leave me to attend to mine. Rab's crimsoning face disappeared. His loom started again, the shuttle crashing from side to side as he wrenched savagely on the cord. And how much extra would this service of yours cost me? Christian met his eyes boldly. A wee bit more than you pay now, but only a wee bit, and for that you can leave the worrying to me. If I let you down, you can take the money off what you due me. She added quickly, and saw that the suggestion had hit home.
Have you asked the women if they'd be agreeable to this?
I thought it best to speak to you first. If you're willing, I'll have a word with them.
They'll never agree to it.
They might. Can I talk to them?
Robert hesitated, gnawing on his lower lip. He had little patience with the business of tramping around the town delivering cloth to the tambourers and collecting it again when it was sewn. But the alternative was to have the women coming to him, cluttering up the passageway and the street outside with their bairns, chattering and laughing outside his door and window. It would be a relief to let someone else deal with that side of things. Speak to them then, he said at last. But if they're not happy with the idea,
I'll never mention it again.
She finished the sentence, already on her way to the door.
Thank you, Uncle Robert. You'll not be sorry.
When she had whisked out, letting the door clap to behind her, Rab said,
It'll never work. They'll never take notice of a wee lass like her.
If they do, I'll be well rid of the responsibility of these women.
I don't know why you let her talk you into these daft ideas,
his son objected. Maybe it's because there's times when I think your cousin Christian has more sense in the tip of one finger than you have in your entire skull, his father rapped back, his voice roughening with sudden irritation at Rab's moodiness.
Now, will you get on with your work, or do I have to take the back of my hand to you?
3 women besides Christian worked at embroidering cloth for Robert Montgomery. By the time the day was out, she had managed to gather them together in the kitchen of the oldest tambourer, Marion Bruce. The women listened to Christian's plans in silence, giving each other sidelong glances from time to time. There was a full minute's pause when she finally finished speaking, and she had the sense to say no more, leaving it to the others. Finally, Marion, the widowed mother of a large brood ranging from a married daughter to a toddler son, said,
Will it make any difference to the money we make? Mr. Montgomery's no going to cut it back, is he?
It'll not make any difference at all, but if we can turn out more work, and that might happen when you don't have to spend time taking the finished work to Townhead or collecting the new cloth, it could mean more money.
I'm half a giving up the tramp to the weaving shop,
Marion said. She was a huge woman, often troubled by breathlessness, although her chubby fingers were among the most skillful in Paisley when it came to fine needlework. One of the others, a woman Christian only knew as Wee Mag, nodded, but the third, a thin, sharp-eyed woman with a mouth that looked as though it had just tasted vinegar, disagreed.
I see no reason why we should let a lassie like this start ordering us around.
I'm not ordering you. I'm just offering to bring the cloth to you and take it back and share out the money as fairly as it was ever done.
It sounds fine to me, Trina,
Wee Mag ventured, but Trina sniffed.
Listen, would it not make sense for us to work together? My Uncle Robert's a fair man, but there are others that take advantage of women trying to earn their own keep,
Christian urged.
You're right there,
Wee Mag chimed in.
My neighbour was just telling me the other day that Alistair Semple, down by St Mairen Bray, tried to get her to take a sack of potatoes in place of the money she'd earned. And her, with 3 bairns, and a sick man to feed and clothe, and rent to pay forby. She didn't agree to it, surely. She'd no choice, poor body. She doesn't keep well herself, and she couldn't afford to anger the man. She worries herself near to death as it is when she's too ill to work. In case he takes on someone better and turns her away when she goes back to his door.
There was an immediate clatter of tongues, each rising above the other in a crescendo of indignation. Christian had to wait until it had subsided before she said,
All the more reason for us to work together then. And if one of us fell sick, the others could share out the work until she was better, so that she'd not lose her place.
Marion wagged her head.
You can't argue with a promise like that, Trina, surely?
I can't, but I don't see why it should be her that takes charge, Trina said waspishly.
She's only just started tambouring. Why shouldn't it be in us?
Exasperation put a whiplash into Christian's voice.
Because it was my idea, that's why.
Marion rumbled and wheezed with laughter.
That's tell you, Trina. Are you with us or are you no?
Trina's mouth writhed for a moment before she said reluctantly,
I suppose I'll hate to join you, but mind this,
she added, glaring at Christian. 1 penny less in my hand, and I'm out.
You and the rest of us, Trina.
Wee Mag assured her, and Marion nodded in agreement.
You'll not be sorry,
Christian promised, resisting the impulse to cross her fingers for luck as she spoke.
She's what?
Gavin asked explosively 2 days later. She's arranged to take responsibility for all of Robert's tampering, Margaret repeated patiently. You have to admit that it makes sense, Gavin. She herself had once employed a number of women weaving tapes on small Inco looms and had built up a thriving little business. It had been taken over by her brother Robert a few years earlier, when Margaret finally decided that running her home and teaching the children at the Poor's Hospital was enough for any woman. There was a woman at the door this very morning asking to speak to her. She's heard of Christian's scheme and she wanted to know if she could get into it.
Dear Lord, are you telling me, woman, that my daughter's going to follow in your footsteps?
Margaret smiled a trifle smugly. It looks like it.
God help Paisley then, for it'll probably not know what's hit it once she gets going.
By the time autumn had begun to spread its flame-red cloak over the braes, Christian's growing band of tambourers needed more than the work Robert Montgomery could give them. Unable to bring herself to turn down the women who wanted to join the group, she tramped around the town talking to the manufacturers until she found one who could use her tambourer's services. Martin Campbell, once apprenticed to Duncan Montgomery, Christian's grandfather, had, in his turn, become the owner of a number of looms. But drink had got the better of Martin, and his hard-working wife, determined not to see her home sold from under her and her children, turned into the street, had wrenched the reins from her husband's hand, and now saw to the weavers herself. She kept Martin supplied with money, and he was content to drink it away with his cronies in the local house and leave her to her own devices.
I'd be glad to let you see to the tampering for me, lassie,
the woman said when Christian approached her.
It's one worry less for myself, and from what Robert Montgomery tells me, you'll make a good job of it.
With a team of women working for her, Christian was at last freed from the burden of continuous sewing.
But I'm still not making enough money to pay a tutor,
she mourned to her mother as they worked together in the garden, gathering in the clothes that had been spread over the bushes to dry.
By the time I pay the lassies their wages, there's not enough left over. Mr. McKechnie in Story Street charges more than I've got.
Margaret's sleeves had been rolled up to beyond the elbow. The afternoon sun touched her arms with gold as she shook out one of Gavin's shirts and folded it. I'm certain your father would be willing to pay the rest, for you've worked hard this year. Christian shook her head.
No, I'll not ask him. I said I'd do it on my own, and I will. And I'll not take it from you either, she added, as Margaret opened her mouth to speak. I'll just have to wait longer, that's all.
Oh, Christian, what good will extra learning do you anyway? Margaret said in sudden exasperation. Being a scholar doesn't mean that life's going to be good to you. Here, give me a hand with this sheet. I was speaking to a poor old soul last time I was at the Poor's Hospital, she went on as they spread the sheet out between them, arms stretched wide, then took a firm hold of the corners and began to fold it. From what he says, he was a scholar in his youth, but he's had nothing but hard times throughout his life. What good has learning done him? Christian looked up from her task, her eyes bright with interest.
What's his name?
Margaret dug into the recesses of her memory, then said, Mally Bruce.
I wonder if there's still enough of the scholar in him to teach me. I doubt if he'd charge as much as Mr. McKechnie.
Margaret dropped the tamed and folded sheet into the basket at her feet. By the look of his nose, like as not his brains addled by drink. Christian dropped another clean, dry shirt into the basket and beamed on her mother.
I'll go and see him tomorrow. You never know. He might suit me very well. He's in the garden, but you'll be fortunate if you get one civil word out of the man,
the hospital mistress said when Christian marched in and asked for Mally Bruce.
He's a bad-tempered old...
She stopped, folding her mouth firmly over the word that had almost spilled out, then said primly,
He'll have to change his ways if he wants to stay here. I can tell you that.
Mally Bruce was easy to find. He was on his own, in a distant corner, fork in hand, attacking a vegetable bed as though it had done him a personal wrong. He was a scarecrow of a man, tall and thin and long-boned, his knobbly wrists and ankles protruding from the shabby clothes he wore. When Christian said,
Are you Mr. Bruce?
He whirled about, the prongs of the fork held before him like a weapon. They were no sharper than the piercing black eyes set between bushy grey brows and a shiny red hooked nose that spoke, as her mother had said, of a history of drinking. The man's mouth was quite lost between that nose and a jutting, aggressive chin. Atop his face, a great untamed bush of grey hair escaped in all directions from beneath a shabby tricorn hat.
"Who wants to ken?"
he asked, suspiciously.
"My name's Christian Knox. My mother teaches the children here."
"What's that got to do with me?"
Someone with less courage would have turned and fled, but Christian, who had been intrigued by unusual characters since babyhood, stood her ground and said,
"My mother tells me you were a scholar."
"Well,
"Is it true?"
are you doubting me?"
He took a step forward, the prongs of the fork glittering in the sun as he moved from the shadow of the wall. Christian swallowed hard.
"I'm looking for a tutor who knows the way of Latin and arithmetic and geography and history."
The fork prongs were lowered slightly.
"A tutor, is it?"
She could tell by the way he shaped the words that the man was almost toothless, as were most of the poor and elderly folk in the town. Even so, her sharp ear heard a certain elegance in the way he used words. This man could indeed have been a scholar once.
"For your brother, maybe?"
"For me?"
"You!"
The thick, shabby brows knotted together so fiercely that she was afraid they might tangle together and stay that way.
"You're a lassie."
"I know,"
said Christian patiently.
"Lassies dinna learn Latin and arithmetic,"
said Mally Bruce scathingly, and turned back to his work. Her patience began to wear thin.
"If I want to learn, I've as much right as anyone. All I'm asking is, will you teach me?"
There was amazement in his black eyes when he looked back at her.
"Me?
Maybe you've forgotten it all."
I've no forgotten nothing."
Then he said slyly,
"What do you gie me in return?"
"I could manage a penny a week."
He spat on the ground.
"Oh aye, and if they—"
His shaggy head indicated the hospital building and the people in authority within its walls.
"Dinna take it off me. I'd nae doubt spend it on drink and gie myself throwed out onto the street."
Exasperation sharpened her voice.
"What do you want then?"
"Eternally, that's what I want. Eternally, so that I can earn my own keep and get out of this place. But the likes of you,"
he finished contemptuously,
"could never get me such a thing. So be off with ye and leave me to my work."
This time, the back presented to Christian was implacable. The conversation was over. She walked slowly towards the hospital, her mind working feverishly. A tourniquet, a knife-grinding machine, would cost far more than she could afford. It would take her months, perhaps a year, to save up enough money. She couldn't bear the thought of waiting for so long before starting her lessons. She had already thought of Daniel as a tutor.